how we take that internal data and kind of streamline that and utilize it, and also compare it to third-party data. And so I think that is probably a key element and a key takeaway is, for any operator, I think it's important not only to understand the third-party data and use that as a resource, but also your internal data, and so again, just being able to kind of leverage all of those different, information streams, if you will, together, I think is truly kind of what will set somebody up for the best success.
Welcome to RevLabs by PriceLabs.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Kyle Driskell. I'm your host today for RevLabs by PriceLabs. And today we are adding another one of our awesome revenue managers into our Life of a Revenue Manager series. So I'm happy today I get to introduce you to Rick Jernigan, who is one of the revenue managers down at Brett Robinson in Alabama. So Rick, if you don't mind, introduce yourself to the team to the audience, and let's get this bad boy rolling.
Well, it sounds good. First and foremost, Kyle, just thank you all, to your team for having us on the program and looking forward to it. So my background, it's not traditional, but I don't think a whole lot of ours, are in the industry. But really, my background is rooted primarily in high-level retail management for about 20 years. I was actually in the grocery industry for a long time, leading stores for a supermarket chain. Really in the high seasonal areas, though, spent a bulk of that period down in the Destin 30A market area. So very seasonal stores, just like what we do for the vacation rental industry. And, I think that segues really a lot. So a lot of the skills that, you kind of pick up along the way doing that kind of role, specifically like with demand forecasting, supply chain initiatives, as well as cross-functional communication and leadership, really transitions, I think, very well into the revenue management role, and really I think what the expectations are for us today. But again, pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation, Kyle.
Absolutely. And for everybody that's listening to this podcast, I would suggest go hit us up on YouTube just so you can see the amazing amount of shine on this call right now, because both Rick and I have a nice shiny bald head here, but it's looking good on the video. So Rick, what got you out of the grocery chain? Is like, and for anybody that's listening knows that I'm kind of similar to you. I came from a hydraulics industry, very seasonal, completely different, but still a nice commodity that you can definitely apply some of those principles in.
Yeah, great question. I think kind of like all of us, I just kind of fell into it, right? So after I actually had to leave the grocery industry due to some life-changing situations that we were going through personally, and found myself honestly just kind of, I think, looking for my next calling, if you will. And I just sort of fell into the industry by chance, really as a part-time customer service rep for really a higher-end small boutique luxury portfolio also in this area. And so I started for them doing the customer service role just for a while, just kind of part-time on the side. And quickly they kind of approached me and said, hey, we've got a revenue management position opening up, would you be interested? And I was like, let's go. We're talking strategic thinking, analytical skills, things that I was very prone to and really drawn to. So again, it just kind of had a calling, and even going back into my childhood, Kyle, like I grew up playing a lot of strategic video games. And so I've always had a love for strategy, right? And I think that still stays with me today. So being able to kind of bring that into the space was rewarding. And then once I really kind of got my feet wet, if you will, and kind of got rolling, absolutely just fell in love with the role, the job, and the entire industry. And it's been an amazing and awesome, 3-year ride for me. That's about how long I've been doing revenue management now. And it's fantastic. So love all the aspects of it, specifically the critical and analytical thinking and the strategic aspects of it.
So what are some of the strategy games from the childhood? Because I'm really interested now, because I got a couple of them lined up for me too, where it's like, oh yeah.
Let's go like old school Warcraft, StarCraft, SimCity, all that kind of stuff, Age of Empires, right? Awesome. Like so all of those,
Yeah, big fan of those. Risk is my favorite game ever. I love that as a board game, and not the same type of thing, but a little bit of that strategy. You got to know when to pull levers and things like that. So
yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
So in your current day-to-day right now, you're working for Brett Robinson, and you've got a whole bunch going on. Y'all have got hotels, you've got STRs, you've got, I'm assuming, some midterm type rentals. People that'll have heavily restricted or that are being heavily restricted for you. What do you find that's enjoyable about the job when you have such a diverse portfolio to look at? And what's something that's on the opposite of enjoyable for you? What's something that when you have a portfolio like that, that's just kind of a thorn in your side, so to speak?
Great questions. Yes, so our portfolio, we have over 1,800 properties, on the coast. And just to your point, Kyle, they range in all various different aspects. But traditionally, we're a lot more dialed into the condo space. But we have everything from high-end luxury condos all the way to more of a value point of entry in some situations. And so I think just being able to balance all that is kind of crucial, really, to our success. We're obviously a high beach market, so the peak season for us is usually kicked off with Memorial Day, and based on the current school system schedules, usually ends around the first week of August these days, which still trying to wrap my head around that. But as a parent, I also kind of enjoy it because it gets kids back to school pretty quickly.
Yep.
But I think for me, it's more or less about kind of, I think, how do we approach handling a portfolio this size, and so it's not necessarily, there's not like a necessary rhythm on the daily. It's more, I kind of have like a weekly workflow that we kind of get into and kind of roll through. For us, like Mondays is really a pretty big reporting day, right? And so that's kind of the time whenever we're really diving into the last prior week's analytics, kind of looking at what all that information entails. There's some internal, collaboration and usually a Monday meeting that we kind of have collectively, but I really try to take advantage of that day as a great time to kind of like, let's take a step back from the higher level, really kind of look back on, the last trends that we saw over the course of the last week, and really kind of let that lay the groundwork for us moving forward, as the rest of the week progresses. Then really from there, Tuesdays for me kind of get into really more of a deep dive into like the next 90 days out, right? So we have a shorter booking window than what the average market does in our operating area. And so it's very crucial for us to stay, I think, on point within that 90-day window period, if you will. And so really Tuesday is kind of my deep dive into that, right? Looking at all the different segmentations. And I mean, we'll get down into the granular level, super micro on an individual basis as needed. Kind of make sure that we have the adjustments right and that those things are going well. And then really like Wednesdays is kind of more of I would say a high level executive reporting day. So that's usually a great time for me to kind of dive into like benchmarking activities. And so that's usually kind of my theme for Wednesdays. Thursday is kind of more of a forward thinking approach. So, it's crucial, as we all know in our industry, to really be proactive versus reactive. If we're having to run and chase fires last minute and pull those levers, we've probably missed an opportunity. So I really like to kind of take a day and kind of carve out time to really forward plan, look ahead, and make sure that everything is looking good from that aspect. And then Friday, I really like to kind of use as kind of a day to look on any of the changes that we made over the course of the week and make sure that we're primed heading into the weekend, specifically like Tuesday, right? So making those adjustments on Tuesday and then Friday really, I think, gives us a great opportunity to kind of dial in and see, what kind of impact did that make, and are we set up where we need to be heading into the weekend. So those are really all things that I enjoy. I guess kind of coming back to the hierarchy question here, what are some of the obstacles? There's not enough days in a week. I wish sometimes we almost had more, because there's probably more rhythms that I could create for us to try to, streamline the process and kind of make managing an 1,800, unit portfolio a little bit more easy, if that's even a thing. But I think that's kind of,
Well, it really hits on the strategy that you're talking about, that like you find the joy in the strategic looking, and not that you're rigidly going in there every Wednesday and doing this and rigidly doing it Thursday, but
correct.
I love hearing the thought process of, okay, one of my days is essentially dedicated to forward looking, and then one of them's kind of like, we still have to balance getting things right further out and then getting anything last minute that we absolutely can. Where do you kind of find that balance for you? Have you found that it's more so like, as long as I'm paying attention to my booking window further out, I'm not having to do quite as much at last minute? Is that kind of where you're at with your strategy?
That's my approach. And I think everybody can probably have something that's a little bit more custom tailored to their specific situation, if you will. But I'm definitely, I try to bring more of a proactive stance, I think, to revenue management. And again, always kind of forward thinking, right? So, I think it's imperative that, again, that we're taking the time to kind of balance out all of these different obstacles and objectives that we have going on. And to your point, the strategic thinking element of it. And so for me, just kind of having a high level set of this is kind of my weekly rhythm does help me kind of navigate that. As we all know, there's multiple other fires that are going to arise at any given point. And I think being able to pivot though, and not being so stringent upon, hey, this is my schedule. If this week, if I need to kind of pivot because something comes up on Wednesday and now, maybe I do a little bit more of my benchmarking on Thursday, as a result, and so be it. We have to kind of be able to, I think, be flexible, roll with the punches. But the key element here, Kyle, I would think, is just being able to prioritize, right? Like, what is the most highest impact point that I need to maybe perhaps touch on from whatever we gathered from the data that we reviewed Monday or throughout the course of the week?
That's awesome to hear. Now you mentioned the data that you review, and I was hoping to get into this at some point. You all have a great setup. You use multiple pricing tools. You've also got a lot of internal reporting mechanisms as well. Is there anything in that reporting mechanism that you use that you think would be useful for any listener here? Maybe a metric that you look at that doesn't get talked about a lot in our field. Anything that you'd want to share from the Brett Robinson perspective, not necessarily the dynamic pricing provider's perspective.
Yeah, great question. I think all the analytics are probably going to be the same for us as it is for anybody, right? One of the biggest ones, though, that I always try to pay attention to that we don't maybe discuss quite enough would be just simply booking windows. And you just mentioned it a minute ago, but I think that's really imperative in kind of telling outside of like the big three, and so I think for me, that's usually kind of a key point of focus, as we kind of go in and dive in. But in terms of our internal analytics, I think one of the big advantages of Brett Robinson is how we invest in technology. We're always looking and trying to stay state of the art. To your point, we utilize quite a bit of different software. We operate part of our portfolio in PriceLabs and then the other part in Wheelhouse. So, we're kind of diving into both of those segments. But internally, it's kind of, I think, what we have built with our internal data that kind of really helps us separate us from the pack, right? And so we utilize a lot of Power BI reporting and automation there, and some of the stuff that the team here collectively does is really awe-inspiring. I joined the Brett Robinson team a little over a year ago, and making that transition over, from a smaller high-end luxury portfolio to a more scaled, very large operation, was a great step for me from a revenue management perspective and my learning and personal growth. But I think the biggest takeaway here was really our director of revenue, Brian Loy, is just a wizard when it comes to data analysis. And so, I'm privileged to be able to work with him and learn from him, how we take that internal data and kind of streamline that and utilize it and also compare it to third-party data. And so I think that is probably a key element and a key takeaway is, for any operator, I think it's important not only to understand the third-party data and use that as a resource, but also your internal data, and so again, just being able to kind of leverage all of those different, information streams, if you will, together, I think is truly kind of what will set somebody up for the best success.
Yeah. Are there any data sources that you use that are kind of off the beaten path, so to speak? I mean, we've talked about PriceLabs, Wheelhouse. Assuming you all use key data, AirDNA, that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that you're looking at?
I mean, that's really the big ones. And then the rest, like I mentioned, is going to be primarily driven from really our API access through Track, right? Pulling our own internal data and comparing those. But you did nail it. I mean, obviously, we utilize key data for that third-party data as well as their DNA. And so we're very active in looking at all those different channels. Obviously, the reporting within PriceLabs and Wheelhouse also continues to advance, and so I think it's great that we're seeing all of these RMS systems starting to incorporate a little bit of that as well, because, the different benchmarking, the different touch points that you all have can vary in some instances. So I think it's crucial for us to also consider that information and weigh that against our collective internal information as well as the other third-party sources.
Yeah. That's really good information, and I mention those because I think everybody that's listening to these understands that the dynamic pricing providers plus key data plus AirDNA are extremely reliable data sources. If you're not using those, please do. Like absolutely, please use those. If you're just flying by the seams or looking at Airbnb and not using those tools, use those as well. From what I've seen, I work with a lot of customers kind of all across the U.S. The markets have shifted in many ways. Some of the booking windows have stretched. Some of them have gotten a lot shorter. Gulf Shores and really that whole just Gulf area seems like it's performing really, really well when you're looking at the people that do it right. Now, obviously, if you look at overall numbers and trends, certain areas may have occupancy down and things like that. But I think generally speaking, you all are still seeing a lot of lift. Is that safe to say?
For us as an operator, yes. For the market, not necessarily. Now, the market remains strong, but what we have seen over really the past 4 years, specifically coming out of COVID, is an ever-growing increase in the available units that are out there for rent. And with that, our area has the demand growth has not paired with that. So it's not necessarily running parallel. So truly the demand has been a little bit of growth here, Kyle, but it hasn't, we've been seeing almost double-digit increases in available inventory in some situations, and the demand just simply hasn't grown at that same pace. So as you can imagine, that can create a more competitive landscape. And so I think, kind of to your point, the more, I don't want to say savvy, but the operators that I think are a little bit more forward-thinking, being a little bit more proactive, understanding that, when and where we can hold rate, when do we need to just kind of be a little bit more occupancy focused. Those are, I think, some of the keys for success within this market. But ultimately, yes, our market is still very strong and it has remained such. And so we're definitely, that's great to see, right? Because I do understand some of the other markets across the U.S. may be seeing a little bit more of an influx, in terms of overall travel demand.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how the beaches responded this year. Some of the cities are not performing anywhere near as well. We were in Nashville not too long ago for a conference, and I was looking at occupancy while we were there for 2 bedrooms, and it's like, wow, 40% down from last year.
Oh my gosh.
There's some crazy weeks like that. But for you all down in the Gulf Shores area, what other kind of, maybe it's over, maybe since COVID, or maybe it's more like in the past year, what other kind of trends have you picked up on with your customers and the guests that are coming in?
So my hill is going to be the length of stay. Right? And so we continue to see the length of stay just shrink, right? So people are staying for less time. And I attribute a lot of that, I think, to just the economy. When the economy is down, I feel like a lot of people are not necessarily wanting to compromise on the quality of vacation that they're accustomed to. So what's the easiest reaction? Well, instead of staying 7 nights this year, we're going to stay 5, but we're still going to stay in the same level that we typically enjoy. We're still going to have the same type of vacation that we're accustomed to. And so I think that's been a trend that we've seen, honestly, since COVID, right? Coming out, that's something that I've continued to see year over year. And that still rings true today. So I think, advice would be for any operator out there, look at your LOS requirements. I think a lot of times that can be just as impactful as the actual price. And in a lot of situations, we've actually seen where, coming off of an LOS restriction on specifically a 7-night down to something a little bit more flexible really opens up the floodgates, and so we actually even saw that a little bit this past summer with our 4-bedroom segments and most of our condos. We were still kind of running a 7-night LOS. We ended up pulling that quite a bit earlier than I think historically we have as an operator, and the results were immediate, and so, yeah.
Roll on that one.
Yep.
That's awesome. I've always joked that the minimum length of stay when you pull that lever, if that's the one lever that's really needing to be pulled, it's almost like the OTAs. And, if you get a lot of direct bookings, it's almost like your website. Just gives you a nice little kick in the backside and sends you right up through it. So
that's right. So.
Well, how about what you got going on in the market? So I know that, I'm up here in Knoxville. I got to shout out my boy, Morgan Wallen. He's got a nice event down there for you guys. Have you seen good impact coming in from that? Do you foresee any other new events coming into that market?
Yeah. So the Boots in My Sand Festival, right, is what it was kind of, and previously, for those that may not be familiar that are watching this, historically, Gulf Shores has always put on, for about the past decade or so, what was called the Hangout Music Festival. Well, this year it was kind of rebranded from Morgan Wallen specifically to the Sand in My Boots. And that was probably the most fun that I've had, in terms of being able to just watch rates go bananas, since I've come into the industry. We saw an insane amount of demand around that event specifically. And so that was a really fun time. It's great for the local tourism industry as a whole. by far the highest, I think turnout that we've seen of any of the, previous hangout festivals, et cetera. So we're hopeful that that trend will continue. Gulf Shores, obviously the chamber there is the ones that kind of coordinate that event contract. And we're kind of hopeful that they'll continue to, especially after seeing the success that everybody seemed to have with it this past year, continue to kind of have that moving forward, on the books.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I know we're here to talk revenue management, but I have a soft spot for Gulf Shores in my heart, so I like to add a little bit of a story as well. I went to a baseball tournament with my cousin when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And I tried shrimp for the first time. And I've literally been chasing this taste of shrimp my entire life. I had the best meal I've ever had down there. So I need you, Rick, as a part of homework, and anybody that's listening, to help me identify where this place is that had the shrimp that I've never been able to find again. So right, if you have any suggestions, shoot them to me afterwards. And if you're listening to this, throw it in the comments if you got a spot as well.
Yeah, and you'll have to let me know a little bit more details about this shrimp, but we'll get it figured out. But yeah, we definitely have some amazing seafood down here on the Gulf course, obviously. But I do think shrimp is probably my personal favorite as well. So yeah.
So Rick, what do you like to do outside of the revenue management stuff when you're not in there twisting and turning the levers and making some money? What do you like to do?
Honestly, I've got 2 young children, and so I think just kind of playing husband and dad is kind of where I'm at. I'm at that stage in life right now. Our oldest is 12 years old, my youngest is 9. So 2 boys, and we're pretty wide open there. So obviously just trying to spend time with family and friends as much as possible. Do still enjoy video games. I alluded to it earlier. So occasionally jump into some Diablo action or something like that, kind of based off whatever's going on. My oldest son is getting into music, which is great. I'm also a huge music buff. So, we tend to do a lot of short trips throughout the year. As a family, we'll go to concerts and stuff like that. So even at that young age, we're exposing our kids to live music and the joy that can bring. And it's been fun just kind of watching them get into that just as much as we enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, Rick, this has been awesome. I love chatting with you. Can't wait to hopefully have you and Brian on at the same time and us really talking to some strategy and maybe get some tips from you. If anybody that's listening wants to reach out to you and ask some questions or anything, any way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just feel free, go to our website. There's some direct links we have an owner support team, as well as just obviously contacts into the call center. They can call there. Or you feel free to shoot me an email directly, and Kyle, if we can share. I have no problem doing that, but my email is rickj@brettrobinson.com. So pretty straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rick, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Hopefully we'll do this again in very near future. Anything you want to leave the audience with? Any tips, tricks, or hot advice?
High advice. Act with intent, right? Every day, come to work with intent in mind and let that kind of guide, your actions, specifically with the larger portfolio segments. Make sure that everything that we do is intentional and try to focus your time as best as you can. So I'll leave you guys with that. But again, Kyle, pleasure being on this podcast for the first time, and look forward to doing it again in the future.
Absolutely. Rick, thank you again for everybody. This is Rick Jernigan. He's with Brett Robinson down in Gulf Shores. Great customer, great. I'm gonna consider you a friend. We're balled together. Like we've bonded through that. So thank you all for listening today. Again, I'm Kyle with RevLabs by PriceLabs. Thank you for listening today. Have a great day.